Puisque je suis née à Dieppe, et le jour du 19 août 1942, j'habitais le bâtiment derrière moi. À l'époque, c'était une banque. Et mon père travaillait dans cette banque. Par conséquent, nous avions l'habitude, pendant les alertes, d'aller à l'abri dans la salle des coffres. Et cette nuit-là, mon père a entendu des canons, des bruits de canons beaucoup plus importants. Il lui semblait que ça venait de la mer. On était fous de joie. On était fous de joie parce que là, on s'est dit, ça y est, c'est la libération, on va être sauvés, les Alliés arrivent, c'est formidable. On était vraiment fous de joie. Et malheureusement, quand le soir, on a vu à nouveau les Allemands revenir, on ne voyait plus de soldats. Alors, mon père a vu tous ces soldats, c'était pitoyable, ils étaient blessés, certains ne pouvaient plus marcher, étaient supportés par leurs camarades. J'en parle toujours à mes enfants. C'est une journée qu'il ne faut pas oublier, que les Dieppois n'oublieront jamais.
We have heard from our three veterans about that 9-hour raid on Dieppe, and now 50 years later, some reflections on that historic event from just above the beaches where these three men fought. Joining me now are Denny Whitaker, Ron Beale, and Archie Anderson. Ron Beale, you saw possibly the worst carnage of all at Puy. Can anything really justify that kind of nightmare loss?
I think you can justify it if you're trying to prove a point. But to try and take a seaport, very heavily fortified seaport, from the sea without any softening up process, they certainly proved their point. It could not be done.
Denny Whitaker, you were a survivor of Dieppe, and you've studied it about as much as anybody, and I know you have a book coming out about the subject right now. Many people who fought that day went away surely bitter, feeling that they had lives squandered and they'd faced a defeat. How do you respond to that degree of bitterness and futility?
Well, it's a very difficult thing to do, but this has happened many times in war, and it was unfortunate that it did happen at Dieppe, but the ultimate result was that strategically it was a success. It delayed the Second Front, for instance. It allowed the British and the Americans to develop equipment, naval equipment, army equipment, Air Force equipment. Many things that were that contributed to the success of D-Day. If it hadn't been for Dieppe, these things would not have been learned, and there was a multitude of them.
Ron, do you buy that? I mean, you saw so much.
Well, part of what Denny is saying leads me to believe that really what happened was we bought them the time to do the things that they felt that they should be doing. On the other hand, he also said that this has happened many times during warfare, and yet you read the history on different battles in different wars, and there's never been an attack of this kind from the sea or from land where there hasn't been a softening up process. If they wanted to determine if they could take a fortified seaport, why didn't they do it properly? Why didn't they send in the bombers? Why didn't they soften up? Why did they not make the job a little easier for the infantry soldiers?
Are the veterans of Dieppe who were prisoners of war, do they have a particular bitterness that perhaps the others don't feel? Is that correct? Your experience was so separate from the others.
Yes, absolutely.
We were talking earlier about, you know, even when you were liberated from prison camp, there really wasn't a lot of relation, was there?
We just had kept ourselves tensed in so long to hide our emotions that we had almost forgotten how to show our emotions. And I think it was some days or even weeks for a lot of us for that rediscovery of emotion to occur. and then it was a flood. And ever since that, it's been easy to show those emotions and very difficult to hide them.
Denny Whitaker, you went on from Dieppe to fight again. You were wounded in Northern Europe in the campaign. How much does it loom as a defining moment in your own life? Dieppe is something that really you can't forget, and even those who weren't prisoners are stuck with that memory.
I was very fortunate. I was not taken prisoner, and I lived to fight again, and I fought in a lot of battles. And some of them were as traumatic as Dieppe. It's something that happened, and it's terribly sad, and I'm very unhappy that it did happen. But nevertheless, life has to go on, and you have to try and put these things behind you.
You all, in fact, went on to, in many ways, happy lives. You've dealt with the trauma. You've continued on, despite the great hardships, haven't you?
But the trauma is still there. It's happened this week with Archie and myself quite frequently. We've been talking about something, and Archie will look at me and my eyes are watering, and I look at Archie and his are doing the same thing.
It's
Actually, we should never look at each other. It's a terrible thing, I think, for all of us when we meet. And when we drink a toast to our fallen comrades at reunions. One man over there will raise his glass higher.
The effect
and
is...
you know who he's raising it to.
Finally, we've called this Return to Dieppe. Returning to Dieppe obviously has many mixed emotions and can be very difficult. Will you return again?
Yes, to pay tribute to my fallen comrades.
I'm sure we all will.
He made a very strong point in mentioning the tribute to the fallen comrades. And with that in mind, I cannot say, no, I won't. I hope I will.
You found it hard to come back, but you think you will return?
Yes. It was very hard to come back. And it'll be hard next time.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment with some final thoughts from novelist Timothy Finley as our program continues on Dieppe.
Le 20 août 1942, je vis arriver à 2 heures du matin à l'Hôtel Dieu de Rouen beaucoup de grands blessés canadiens du raid de Dieppe. Et il y avait entre autres un blessé qui avait les yeux brûlés. Il ne m'avait pas jamais vu, mais il m'avait entendu parler au chirurgien allemand qui voulait à tout prix lui sauver un œil, ce qui fut fait. Et 40 ans après, je l'ai revu lors du 40e anniversaire du débarquement de Dieppe, et lui-même s'est jeté dans mes bras parce qu'il m'a reconnu à la voix.
Most of the Canadians who died in the raid are buried here at Dieppe's Canadian War Cemetery. Before we leave you tonight, we'd like to thank the people of Dieppe for their help in preparing this program over the past week. And of course, a very special thanks to our 3 veterans. It was not an easy return for them, but it was their stories and their determination to remember their comrades that brought us here tonight. And now, as we leave you, an essay on the Dieppe raid by writer Timothy Finley.
I was 11 years old when word hit the headlines of Canada's triumph at Dieppe. It took no time at all for us to discover how much of a lie that triumph was. The survivors told us. We had a neighbor who had made it back from that raid. And when we sat with him at the dinner table, for instance, you could see him suddenly go pale and fall silent, break out in a sweat, and begin to shake the horrors he'd endured would never, never leave him. I was in my 50s when I first visited the town of Dieppe and stood beneath the cliffs, but no amount of holiday laughter can ever drown out the echoes of that battle. Everywhere I walked in that town, I walked with the dead of that morning. Ghosts who walk there with the other ghosts who have helped to put Dieppe into the history books, the infamous and the notorious and the fashionable, who have rambled along those ramparts and the promenade. Oscar Wilde, Sarah Bernhardt, Camille Saint-Saëns, Edward VII. There's another reason that Canadians remember Dieppe. It was the embarkation point for many of the families of France who came to settle along the St. Lawrence River. And roughly 400 years later, some of their descendants returned to Dieppe to die on the beaches there. The battle lasted a matter of hours only, and yet it changed us all forever. The soldiers who fought there gained their maturity at a dreadful price, and so did our country. I have stood by the graves of the fallen, and we remember their bravery, and we remember their sacrifice. And we remember the terrible injustice of their suffering.
Good job, they wouldn't.